the Opel Manta A. A car with a name borrowed from the ocean's most graceful creature, designed in 6 frantic weeks by a team working through one hot German summer and built for young drivers who wanted style without breaking the bank. Nearly 500,000 rolled out of Rüsselsheim between 1970 and 1975. Yet this sporty coupe would become famous not just for what it was, but for an entire comedy culture that would spring up around it decades later. This is the story of a car that was never meant to be a joke, but somehow became Germany's most lovable automotive punchline. In the summer of 1969, the design studio at Opel's headquarters in Rüsselsheim, Germany, was buzzing with nervous energy. Chuck Jordan, the American design legend running Opel's styling department at the time, had thrown down a challenge to his team. Create a sporty 2-door coupe for young buyers, make it modern, make it exciting, and do it fast. The European market was heating up with competition, and Opel needed an answer. An American-born designer named George Gallion stepped up to take on the task. What followed was what Gallion would later call the summer of work. For 6 intense weeks, Gallion and his colleagues worked long hours sketching, sculpting clay, and refining what would become the Manta A. He later recalled starting every morning at 8 o'clock sharp with his team, transforming raw ideas into 3-dimensional forms that could actually be built. The pressure was immense, but so was the excitement. To save precious development time, the team made some clever shortcuts. They borrowed the round rear lights from the recently discontinued Opel GT sports car. These lights gave the new coupe a friendly, familiar face that Opel fans would immediately recognize. The GT had been a beautiful little sports car, and taking design cues from it was a smart move. Why reinvent the wheel when you already have something that works? The design, taking shape in that Rüsselsheim studio, was smooth and flowing, with none of the sharp creases or aggressive fins that had dominated car design in the 1960s. This was a new decade, and it called for a new approach. The Manta's lines were clean and uncluttered. The front end had a broad, smiling grille and round headlights that gave it an approachable character. The long hood and short rear deck gave it what Americans called a pony car attitude. Think Ford Mustang or Chevrolet Camaro, but scaled down for European roads and European budgets. Speaking of the name, Opel had previously experimented with a concept car called the Opel Manta A. The production Manta would inherit that name from the graceful manta ray of the sea. In a story that perfectly captures the attention to detail of those days, George Gallion actually flew to Paris to meet the famous ocean explorer Jacques Cousteau. Why? Because Cousteau was the only person on Earth with good photographs of actual manta rays. Gallion wanted to see what a real manta ray looked like so he could design the manta's emblem properly. That level of commitment to getting every detail right shows how seriously the team took this project. By September 1970, the new Opel Manta A was ready for the world. It was unveiled as a sleek, shark-like coupe that combined bold style with everyday practicality. The car was built on the floorpan and running gear of the new Opel Ascona sedan, which had just been introduced. Sharing a platform with a bread-and-butter family sedan meant development costs stayed low, and that savings could be passed on to buyers. The whole point was to create a car that looked like $1 million but cost a fraction of that. Make it desirable. Make it affordable. Make sure young people could actually buy one. Under the hood, Opel offered a range of 4-cylinder engines to suit different markets and budgets. At the bottom of the lineup was a small 1.2-liter engine, producing around 60 horsepower. This was offered in some European countries where taxes on engine size made smaller motors attractive. Moving up, there was a 1.6-liter engine available in 2 states of tune. The base version made 68 horsepower, while a sportier 1.6-liter SR variant pumped out 80 horsepower. The engine most people associate with the Manta A is the 1.9-liter 4-cylinder. At launch, this motor produced 90 horsepower, which was respectable for a small coupe in 1970. It gave the Manta a 0 to 60 miles per hour time, or 0 to 97 kilometers per hour, in the mid-12-second range. That might not sound fast by today's standards, but for a small European coupe of that era, it was perfectly adequate. The car felt quick and eager, which was more important than raw numbers. Transmission choices included a 4-speed manual gearbox as standard. For buyers who wanted a more relaxed driving experience, Opel offered a 3-speed automatic transmission. This was actually a first for an Opel coupe. The automatic used an Opel TH180 unit and was marketed toward customers who did a lot of city driving or just preferred not to shift gears themselves. Most enthusiasts stuck with the manual for the sportier driving feel. The Manta's engineering underneath was solid and mostly conventional for the time. It used what Opel called a cam-in-head 4-cylinder engine design. This was Opel's name for their overhead cam-style engine, and it was a proven design they had been using for years. The car was rear-wheel drive, which was standard for European coupes back then. The front suspension used double wishbones with coil springs, while the rear featured a live axle with trailing arms and a panhard rod. This setup might sound basic compared to modern multi-link suspensions, but it worked beautifully for the Manta's mission. Many Mantas came from the factory with anti-roll bars front and rear. These helped keep the car flat in corners and gave it handling grip that enthusiasts still praise today. Automotive journalists who tested the Manta at launch noted its responsive steering and confident cornering. Octane magazine would later look back and observe that the Manta was a sharp driving car from the factory and still feels eager on corners by classic car standards. The steering was light and direct, the chassis felt nimble, and the whole package came together in a way that felt greater than the sum of its parts. Brakes were disc brakes up front and drum brakes in the back, which was typical for cars in this class at the time. Top speeds ranged from roughly 95 to 105 miles per hour, or 153 to 169 kilometers per hour, depending on which engine you had under the hood. The 1.9-liter models were the quickest, while the little 1.2-liter versions took their time getting up to speed but sipped fuel gently. When the Manta hit showrooms across Europe, it was an immediate eye-catcher. Motor journalists praised its attractive styling and modern feel. The car looked expensive, but it was priced competitively thanks to all that parts sharing with the Ascona sedan. Young buyers especially took notice. Here was a car that looked like something a movie star would drive, but with payments that a regular working person could actually afford. Opel marketed the Manta aggressively. Advertisements showed the car on winding mountain roads, at ski resorts, and parked in front of trendy restaurants. The message was clear. This is a car for people who are young, or at least young at heart. People who want to enjoy life and look good doing it. The animal name fit perfectly into the zeitgeist of the era. Just as Ford had the Mustang, Chevrolet had the Stingray, and Plymouth had the Barracuda, Opel now had the Manta. Animal names matched the optimistic, adventurous spirit of the early 1970s. In Europe, the Manta was sold through Opel's normal dealership network and did well across the continent. In the United States, however, the story was a bit different. From 1971 to 1975, the Manta was imported and sold only through Buick dealerships. Opel did not have its own standalone dealers in America at that time, so Buick dealers handled the imports. In the U.S. market, it was initially marketed simply as the Opel 1900 Sport Coupe to avoid confusing American buyers who might not know what a Manta was. American customers only got one engine choice, the 1.9-liter. Opel figured that Americans would want the biggest engine anyway, so why complicate things with multiple options? U.S. spec Mantas came with heavy-duty cooling systems to handle American summers and long highway drives. There was even a special American-only rally trim that gave some cars a black hood and extra gauges on the dashboard. It was meant to evoke the spirit of rally racing and give the car a more aggressive look. However, as the 1970s progressed, emissions regulations started tightening, particularly in the United States. By the mid-70s, U.S. market Mantas saw their power drop from 90 horsepower down to 75 horsepower as engineers struggled to meet new clean air standards while keeping costs reasonable. Opel responded by introducing fuel injection for 1975, which helped maintain performance as best as possible given the regulatory constraints. It was a challenging time for all car manufacturers, and Opel was no exception. Despite these challenges, the Manta found success. European buyers loved it. American buyers who discovered it through Buick dealers loved it too, even if it remained a relatively rare sight on U.S. roads. By the time production ended in August 1975, Opel had built 498,553 first-generation Manta A models, nearly 500,000 cars in just 5 years. That made it one of Opel's best-selling models of the entire decade. Part of that success came from Opel's smart trim-level strategy. At launch, there were 2 main versions. The base Deluxe had all the essentials you needed: good looks, decent equipment, and that sporty coupe body. The sportier SR model came with wider tires, racing stripes along the sides, and the 1.9-liter engine as standard. The SR was the one you bought if you wanted people to know you had the quick version. In late 1972, Opel added a new variant called the Berlinetta. The name Berlinetta comes from Italian racing terminology and refers to a lightweight coupe. Opel's Berlinetta was not exactly lightweight in the racing sense, but it was definitely upscale. It featured halogen headlamps, a heated rear window, a sport steering wheel, and a distinctive quilted vinyl roof. Some advertisements showed a Berlinetta with plush blue seats parked against a snowy mountain backdrop, marketing it as both sporty and comfortable. The Berlinetta was Opel's way of saying that the Manta could be luxurious as well as fun. By 1974, the lineup had expanded further. A Luxus version appeared with richer interior fabrics and wood grain panels on the dashboard. This was for buyers who wanted the Manta's looks but with a bit more sophistication inside. At the other end of the spectrum was the new GT E model, introduced in 1974 and aimed squarely at driving enthusiasts. The GTE stood for Grand Tourer/Einspritzung. Einspritzung is German for injection, referring to the fuel injection system. This was the top performance Manta A. It featured a fuel-injected 1.9-liter engine, making about 105 horsepower. That might not sound like a huge jump over the standard 90-horsepower engine, but fuel injection made the power delivery smoother and more responsive. The GTE also sat lower on its suspension, rode on stylish raw-style alloy wheels, and had extra gauges mounted in a pod on the dashboard so the driver could keep an eye on oil pressure and other vital statistics. It was the Manta for people who took their driving seriously. By 1974 and 1975, the full European lineup included 5 main trim levels: the Deluxe, the SR, the Berlinetta, the Luxus, and the GT E. Opel knew how to segment a market. There was a Manta for every taste and budget, from the basic model for someone who just wanted good looks, all the way up to the GT E for the enthusiast who wanted every performance feature Opel could offer. Opel also created some special editions to keep the Manta fresh and exciting as its production run drew to a close. In 1975, they introduced the Black Magic. True to its name, the Black Magic came with black paint, red and orange stripes running along the body, and a wild plaid interior. It looked like something a rock star would drive, and that was exactly the point. There was also a Swinger edition that came in white with red accents. These special editions gave the Manta a touch of personality and marketing sizzle just as the model was preparing to hand the baton to its successor. Inside, the Manta offered a sporty but comfortable cabin. It seated 4 people, with bucket-style front seats and a bench rear seat. The rear seat was adequate for 2 adults on short trips or 2 kids on longer ones. The dashboard was straightforward and easy to read, with round gauges clustered in front of the driver. Higher trim levels got fancier materials, but even the base model felt well put together. Everything felt solid and durable, which was important for a car targeting young buyers who would actually use it every day. The Manta's smooth, flowing lines and practical interior made it feel more grown-up than some of its competitors. You could drive to work during the week and take it on a weekend road trip without feeling like you were suffering. That combination of style and usability was key to its appeal. It was not a cramped, uncomfortable sports car. It was a real-world coupe that happened to look fantastic. While most Mantas were kept stock by their owners, Opel and some independent partners experimented with more extreme versions during the car's short life. One of the most famous was the Turbo Manta. In 1973, Opel teamed up with Broadspeed, a British racing and tuning company, to create a turbocharged version of the Manta 1.9-liter SR. Broadspeed took 5 standard Mantas and fitted them with turbochargers. The result was spectacular. The Turbo Manta was painted bright yellow with black stripes and looked aggressive even standing still. Under the hood, the turbocharged 1.9-liter engine now produced an astonishing 156 horsepower. That was nearly double the first output of the standard motor. Performance was breathtaking. The Turbo Manta could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour or 0 to 97 kilometers per hour in under 8 seconds. For a small 1970s coupe, that was unheard of. The automotive press went wild. Here was a car that could embarrass much more expensive machinery. But there was a catch. The Turbo Manta's fuel consumption doubled compared to the standard car. Turbocharging technology in the early 1970s was still primitive, and the setup was very expensive to produce. Opel quietly decided not to put the Turbo Manta into regular production. Only 5 factory examples were built by Broadspeed. Interestingly, a British Opel dealer later created 28 more Turbo Mantas using 1974 Berlinetta shells, but these were unofficial conversions, not sanctioned by Opel. In total, only about 33 Turbo Mantas ever existed. Today, they are incredibly rare and valuable collector cars. Another wild experiment came from Belgium. In 1971, a company called Transurop Engineering decided to stuff a 2.8-liter 6-cylinder engine from the larger Opel Commodore sedan into a Manta body. The result was the TE 2800. With a Chevrolet-derived V6 engine under its hood and a bulging hood scoop to clear the taller motor, the TE 2800 was terrifyingly fast. People who drove it said it could outgun a Porsche 911 of the day. That is serious performance. However, Opel itself would not officially support the project. Transurop Engineering and the tuning company Steinmetz ended up building only 79 of these TE-branded cars without Opel badges. The TE 2800 was too expensive, too specialized, and too far outside Opel's mainstream plans. Still, it showed what was possible with the Manta's basic chassis. The platform could handle serious power if you were willing to engineer it properly. For most buyers, though, these extreme versions were just magazine curiosities. The Manta they bought was powered by one of the regular 4-cylinder engines, and that was perfectly fine. Even in stock form, the Manta handled well, looked great, and provided years of reliable service. Opel offered a long options list that included sunroofs, vinyl roofs in various colors, sport wheels, and all sorts of interior upgrades. You could personalize your Manta to suit your style without going to an outside tuner. The Manta even made a name for itself in motorsport. Several factory-backed and private racing teams campaigned Mantas in rallies across Europe and the United States during the early 1970s. The car's nimble chassis and stout engines made it competitive in its class. While the Manta A was never a full factory race car like the later Manta B would become, it still won a large number of rallies in Europe and the United States. Seeing Mantas sideways on gravel roads with mud flying and engines screaming helped cement the car's sporting credentials in the public mind. Racing improves the breed, as the old saying goes, and the Manta's rally success proved it was more than just a pretty face. When the curtain fell on the Manta A in August 1975, Opel had a clear successor ready to go. The second-generation Manta B debuted that same year and would go on to have a much longer production run, lasting all the way until 1988. The Manta B would become even more famous, especially in motorsport. But the Manta A never disappeared from history. It was the original, the one that started it all, the one that proved Opel could build a coupe that was stylish, affordable, and fun to drive. In its 5-year production run, the Manta A embodied a confident and optimistic design spirit. The early 1970s were a time of change in the automotive world. The wild excess of the 1960s was fading, but the dull malaise of the later 70s had not yet arrived. The Manta A fit perfectly into that sweet spot. It was modern without being cold, sporty without being impractical, fun without being frivolous. The car's influence extended far beyond its sales figures. In Germany especially, the Manta became more than just a car. It became a cultural icon. By the 1980s and 1990s, a whole comedy genre of jokes emerged about Opel Manta drivers. These jokes painted a picture of the typical Manta driver, or Mantafahrer in German, as a flashy, fun-loving guy often nicknamed Manni. He loved his car as much as his carefully styled hair and fashionable clothes. He was not necessarily the smartest guy, but he knew how to have a good time. One classic joke asks, "What is the shortest Manta joke ever?" The answer is, "A Manta is parked outside a university." The implication being that a Manta driver would never be smart enough to attend university. Another joke asks, "Why does a Manta have a rear window defroster?" Answer, "To keep your hands warm while you push it." These jokes were gentle teasing, not mean-spirited mockery. They showed genuine affection for the car and its drivers. This humor even found its way into German cinema. In 1991, a movie called Manta was released. It was an outright comedy celebrating Manta culture, complete with period fashion, tuned cars, and plenty of jokes. The film was a hit in Germany, and further cemented the Manta's place in popular culture. As the automotive blog Jalopnik once noted, "No particular car in America has generated such an enthusiastic and specific joke culture as the Opel Manta has in Germany." It became a national phenomenon. Ironically, many Manta owners today embrace this stereotype with pride and humor. Classic car clubs and gatherings often play up the 1970s vibe with period-correct fashion, disco music, and lovingly modified cars. There are trophies for the best engineered joke at some Manta meetings. This cultural afterlife was completely unintended by Opel's designers and engineers, but it shows how deeply the Manta captured the public imagination. Beyond the jokes, though, there is genuine sentiment. For many Germans, the Manta represents a simpler time, a time when cars were easier to work on, when emissions regulations had not yet strangled performance, and when a young person could actually afford a stylish coupe on a modest salary. The Manta was reliable, practical, and exciting all at once. It was the kind of car you could drive every day without worry, and still enjoy every time you got behind the wheel. After the Manta B replaced it in 1975, the Manta A quickly fell out of the spotlight. Newer was always better in the car world, and the Manta B was indeed a better car in most measurable ways. But by the 1990s and 2000s, something interesting happened. The Manta A began a classic car revival. Enthusiasts started seeking out original examples and restoring them. Prices for good condition Manta started climbing, though they remained affordable compared to some other classics from the era. Classic car clubs dedicated to the Manta formed across Europe. Annual Manta meetings draw hundreds of first-generation Mantas from across the continent. Owners proudly show off their restored or modified cars. Some stay completely stock and original, preserving automotive history. Others are modified with modern engines, suspensions, and paint jobs, showing that the basic design can still look fresh 50 years later. The designers themselves sometimes attend these celebrations. George Gallion, reflecting on a 50th anniversary event for the Manta, noted that seeing the car still loved and remembered was a special tribute. For someone who spent that intense summer of 1969 working 8-hour days to create something new, watching people celebrate his creation half a century later must be incredibly rewarding. Not every designer gets to see their work become a cultural touchstone. In 2020, Opel unveiled something unexpected, a concept car called the Manta GC Electro MOD. It was built using the body of an old Manta A, but completely re-engineered with a modern electric powertrain. The concept featured electric motors, a battery pack, and all the latest technology, wrapped in that classic early 1970s shape. Opel said it was a tribute to the Manta's legacy and a statement about the future of classic car ownership. Could old classics be converted to electric power to keep them running in an increasingly eco-conscious world? The Manta GC Electro MOD suggested yes. The electric Manta concept got a lot of attention from automotive media around the world. It showed that Opel had not forgotten its heritage, even as the company moved toward an all-electric future. The Manta name still carried weight, the shape still looked good, and the idea of blending classic style with modern technology resonated with enthusiasts and environmentalists alike. Looking back over the entire story of the Manta A, certain themes emerge: speed and innovation in design, 6 weeks from sketch to clay model, parts sharing and platform engineering to keep costs down, multiple trim levels to appeal to different buyers, special editions to generate excitement, motorsport success to prove capability, and a cultural impact that far exceeded what anyone expected. The Manta A was not the fastest car of its era. It was not the most luxurious. It was not the most advanced, technically, but it was one of the most successful at being exactly what it set out to be: a stylish, affordable, sporty coupe for young buyers who wanted something special. Nearly 500,000 people bought one. Millions more admired them in showrooms or saw them on the road and thought, maybe someday, the name Manta, borrowed from that graceful sea creature, fit perfectly. The car moved with a smooth, confident elegance. It was not aggressive like a shark. It was not flashy like a peacock. It was simply beautiful in its own way, gliding through the automotive landscape of the early 1970s with an ease that made it look effortless. Chuck Jordan and George Gallion took a risk when they pushed to create the Manta in just 6 weeks. They could have played it safe, taken more time, done more market research. But sometimes in the car business, speed matters. By moving quickly, they captured a moment in time. They created a design that felt fresh and modern in 1970, and somehow still looks charming today. The mechanical simplicity of the Manta A also contributed to its success. By using the Ascona's proven platform, Opel avoided the nightmare of engineering an entirely new car from scratch. The suspension, steering, and brakes were all sorted out already. The engines were reliable units Opel had been building for years. This meant the Manta could go into production quickly and with minimal teething problems. It also meant repair and maintenance were straightforward for the thousands of mechanics working at Opel dealerships across Europe. For buyers, that simplicity translated into reliability and low running costs. You could take your Manta to any Opel dealer and they would have the parts and knowledge to fix it. Insurance was reasonable because the car shared so many components with cheaper models. It was a smart, sensible way to build a sports coupe. And it worked. The Manta A also benefited from good timing. It arrived just as the youth market was exploding in Europe. The post-war generation was coming of age, earning money, and looking for cars that reflected their personalities. They did not want their parents' sedans. They wanted something with style and attitude. The Manta delivered exactly that at a price young buyers could actually afford. The right car at the right time for the right market. Of course, not everything about the Manta A was perfect. Early cars had some quality control issues, as was common with new models in that era. Rust was a problem, especially in northern European countries where road salt ate through the body panels. The rear seat was tight for adults on long trips. The trunk was not huge. The drum brakes in the rear could fade under hard use. These were real compromises, but owners loved their Mantas anyway. They overlooked the flaws because the overall package was so appealing. That is the mark of a truly successful car. When people love it despite its problems, you know you have created something special. The Manta had that magic quality that made owners smile every time they walked up to it in a parking lot. As the 1970s progressed and the Manta A aged, Opel kept it competitive with updates and special editions. The introduction of the GT E in 1974 showed that Opel was still committed to performance, even as emissions regulations tightened. The Black Magic and Swinger special editions kept the car feeling fresh in showrooms. These were not major overhauls, but they kept buyers interested until the Manta B was ready to take over. When production finally ended in August 1975, the Manta A had accomplished everything Opel asked of it and more. It sold in huge numbers. It won rallies. It put smiles on faces. It established the Manta name as synonymous with affordable sporting style. The Manta B would build on that foundation and take the formula even further, but none of it would have been possible without the original Manta approving the concept. Today, surviving Manta, as are cherished by collectors and enthusiasts. Finding a good one takes patience and often involves looking across multiple countries. Many were driven hard, crashed, or simply rusted away. But the ones that survive and have been properly restored are wonderful machines to drive. They feel light and nimble by modern standards. The steering has real feedback. The engines may not be powerful, but they are willing and responsive. You sit low, surrounded by glass, with a great view of the road ahead. It feels like driving in a way that many modern cars do not. Classic car values for Manta As have been climbing steadily. A few years ago, you could buy a decent example for a few €1,000 or pounds. Today, nice ones command significantly more, and pristine GT, E models, or rare special editions can fetch serious money. This appreciation reflects growing recognition of the Manta A's importance in automotive history. It was a significant car, not just a disposable coupe. The Manta's influence can also be seen in other cars that followed. The formula it established, building a sporty coupe on a mainstream sedan platform to keep costs down, became standard practice across the industry. The Honda Accord Coupe, Toyota Celica, and countless others followed the same pattern. Use existing mechanical components, add a stylish body, market it to younger buyers. Opel did not invent this approach, but the Manta A was one of the best executed examples of it. In the end, the Opel Manta A deserves to be remembered as more than just the car that spawned 1,000 German jokes. It deserves recognition as a well-designed, well-engineered product that achieved its goals brilliantly. It brought sporty style to the masses. It proved that affordable and desirable were not mutually exclusive. It showed that careful platform sharing and smart parts management could create a business success while still delivering something people genuinely wanted to own. From that hot summer in 1969, when George Gallion and his team worked feverishly to create something new, through 5 years of production and nearly 500,000 cars built, to the classic car meetings and electric concept cars of today, the Manta A story is one of success. Not the success of being the fastest or the most powerful, but the success of being exactly right for its time and place. A car that made people happy, a car that served its owners well, a car that earned its place in automotive history not through technical innovation or racing glory alone, but through the simple act of being a really good car that lots of people loved. The Manta name, borrowed from Jacques Cousteau's photographs of graceful sea creatures, turned out to be prophetic. The Manta A glided through its era with style and confidence, just like its namesake glides through ocean waters. It was not the loudest or the fastest fish in the sea, but it was beautiful, capable, and memorable. More than 50 years after George Gallion and Chuck Jordan sketched those first lines in Rüsselsheim, the Opel Manta A still captures imaginations and wins hearts. That is a legacy worth celebrating.